With Niger under pressure following a military coup last month, the army takes power in Gabon. Officers in Libreville have announced the end of 5 decades of Bongo family rule, while foreign powers continue to threaten military intervention in Niger. What can restore stability to these restive nations? And could more takeovers be in the cards? I'm Andrea Sankey, and today's newsmaker is Africa's military coup. With already heightened tension following a military takeover in Niger, the world is now watching another coup d'etat unfold, this time in the Central African West Coast nation of Gabon. The Gabonese Election Council had just declared that President Ali Bongo won a landslide third term in office in a widely disputed election. Hours later, the army placed him under house arrest, and gunfire was heard in the streets of the capital. A previous attempt to seize power in Gabon in 2019 saw soldiers in prison. But this time, army officers say they are ending the Bongo regime.
Au nom du peuple gabonais.
In the name of the people of Gabon and as guarantors of the institutions, we have decided to defend peace by putting an end to the current regime. To this end, the general elections of 26 of August 2023 and the truncated results are cancelled. The borders are closed until further notice. All the institutions of the Republic are dissolved.
Well, African leaders were already grappling with a string of military coups, mostly to the north of Gabon. Niger was the fourth country to see a military takeover in West Africa since 2020, along with Mali, Guinea, and Burkina Faso. In Central Africa, Chad and Sudan are also under military rule. Now, Niger is part of the Sahel region, along with Mali and Burkina Faso, which has been plagued by instability for years, with various groups linked to Al-Qaeda and Daesh active in the area. Military leaders say they had to take power for security reasons and have promised a return to civilian rule in 3 years.
The truth is, the seizure of power by the forces of defense and security so early, firmly supported by our population, is part of a context of rejection of security models and bad governance made of injustice, and corruption implemented by regimes, which claim to be democratic, but which in reality lack democracy.
West African bloc ECOWAS has been negotiating to restore constitutional order to Niger. But if that doesn't work, they've threatened a military intervention with a regional force put on standby earlier this month. In response to that threat, Niger's military junta have put their armed forces on maximum alert and authorized neighboring Burkina Faso and Mali to come to their defense if needed. The AU has suspended Niger and is implementing sanctions while assessing the impact of an ECOWAS intervention.
Now it is not too late for the military authorities in Niger to reconsider their action and listen to the voice of reason, as the regional leaders will not condone coup d'etat. But if peaceful means fail, ECOWAS cannot just fold its hands.
Well, regional efforts to reverse Niger's coup have been backed by the United States and former colonial power France. Both countries have military bases there, which have been battling armed rebel groups in the Sahel. President Bazoum was a staunch ally of the West in the fight against those groups. But anti-French sentiment and protests have intensified. Coup leaders gave the French ambassador 48 hours to vacate Niger, but Sylvain Ité refused to leave, and neighboring Mali has called on the Russian mercenary group Wagner to help fight armed groups, with suggestions that Niger's coup leaders may do the same. The Wagner group has been accused of human rights abuses in several African countries.
I think we need to find reliable partners. I didn't know the Russian flag or Wagner group before the advent of the military government here in Niger. Before, there were people who didn't take into account the value of our raw materials. With new partners like them, We believe the Nigerians can benefit from these resources.
I think that here in Niger, we wish for Russia and Wagner to come here. You asked if now that the Wagner leader is dead, this will create problems. The answer is no. There won't be any problems. They can come. There won't be any problems, and we wish for them to come.
So, with a complicated web of often corrupt interests at play here, is there any way stability and democracy can be ensured? Joining me now to debate some of the many issues involved are from Oslo, Olayinka Ajala, a senior lecturer in politics and international relations at Leeds Beckett University. From Perth, Australia is Mohammed Dan Suleiman, a research associate at Curtin University. And from Washington, we have Daniel Eizenga, a research fellow at the Africa Center for Strategic Studies. Thanks all so much for being with me. I'll tell you what, let's begin with Gabon, because a very short time ago, actually, Ali Bongo was able to post a video message to his friends. So let's listen quickly to what he said first.
I'm Ali Bongo Ondimba, President of Gabon, and I'm to send a message to all the friends that we have all over the world to tell them to make noise, For the people here have arrested me and my family. My son is somewhere, my wife is in another place, and I'm at the residence. Right now, I'm in the residence and nothing is happening. I don't know what's going on. So I'm calling you to make noise, really. I'm thanking you. Thank you.
Okay, now we're not sure exactly how he was able to record that message, but regardless, those were his words. And it's fair to say most would consider France one of those friends he's referring to. And Paris has made a statement naturally condemning the coup and then demanding that election results be respected. But Daniel, is that not a major part of the problem here, in that so many Gabonese people believe the election was rigged and that France is in huge part responsible for the 56-year rule of the Bongo family to protect its interests?
Yes, I mean, I think certainly the Bongo family bears some responsibility here for the current and ensuing instability. Certainly they have, those 56 years have been characterized by repressive tactics and multiple elections with questionable results and many irregularities. And I think that, that does not necessarily make the coup legitimate. I think that it's proper to denounce the coup. I think that really what matters now is the way forward. And so tracking what the military decides to do in terms of determining the results of those elections, I think is probably a clear next step. If it's possible for a recount to be done, then that may be the best course of action at this point. And perhaps with some degree of greater oversight in terms of the vote counting process, that can resolve both sides of this political crisis in Gabon.
A recount. I mean, let me ask Mohammed if that sounds a bit simplistic. And also, in the case of Gabon, there are so many interests behind the scenes at play here, not least the business interests that are connected to Ali Bongo and his family. So would you see this potentially going in the same direction then as Niger has gone, or could it come down to a more simple kind of resolution like a vote count, as Daniel had mentioned?
First of all, I think it is very likely that things will go down the same direction as Niger. And it is also important for us to acknowledge that whenever there is a coup automatically ends the previous status quo and starts a new one, no matter what the responses are. So given what is happening across the continent, I will not be surprised that what's happening in Niger plays out in Gabon. It's interesting listening to the now ousted president calling on the world to actually make noise rather than calling the Gabonese themselves. And that should tell you how some of these leaders, having stayed in power for so long, actually receive their legitimacy from the international system rather than the very people they are supposed to govern.
Right. I don't know if he was able to make a statement in French, for example, to the Gabonese people. That we haven't seen play out anywhere. But it is quite possible that you're right. He did post that statement in English to his friends specifically abroad. Olayinka, let me ask you, I mean, do you agree as well that what's happening in Niger is likely going to play out the same way in Gabon? And then from there, could it spread potentially to arguably Côte d'Ivoire, Togo, perhaps? Where else could you see it going?
Absolutely. I agree that it's a big problem. And the question everybody's been asking since morning is, why is it Francophone Africa? So it's spreading across Francophone Africa. And as previously said, I totally agree that it's going to be once these things happen, they are very difficult to reverse because it's calculated. And then again, we've seen, unfortunately, the president recording this message and asking his friends to not directly saying it, but trying to intervene in some forms. We'll wait to see whether there is another recorded messages directed at the citizens. Regarding what could happen next, I'm sure the government of Côte d'Ivoire and Cameroon will be watching their backs now. Cameroon, because this is another long reigning president who's been there for a very, very long time indeed. So unfortunately, I don't think we've seen the end of this unfortunate incident, which we should all condemn. No matter how poor these regimes have been, military taking over is not actually the solution.
I've heard mention as well of Benin. I mean, there's a long list of countries that could possibly follow suit here. But very quickly, Olayinka, I'll stick with you. Do you think Gabon's attempt now and this takeover, does it thwart those plans to potentially invade Niger to stop the military from actually cementing its grip?
I think the one in West Africa, the one in Niger, has been building up for a while now. And no one saw the happenings in Gabon a couple of days ago or even a week ago. So the resolution came when after the meeting in Accra, saying that military intervention is more probable. The stationing of the troops and the attempt, I still think it's an attempt to force the hands of the regime. Because we are all holding our nerves at the moment. I mean, when I say we, I mean from the region, because a military intervention in Niger would be a disaster, regardless of how short it is. Because I don't see it being a short military intervention. The window for that is gone, and any form of intervention will be disastrous for the region. So I don't think there's a connection. I think this is something that's been planned, and it just happens to be on the same day.
Okay, fair enough. Daniel, if we can, I'll take a step back quickly with you and help us understand why are most of these military takeovers in these specifically former French colonies? What is actually the common thread here in the colonial legacy that's led to this backlash, if you will?
Well, I think it's true that they are former French colonies, and I think it's also fair to point that there are, colonial legacies at play in terms of how the military has developed over time, and certainly in Francophone Africa, the colonial legacy is more similar in terms of military development, in terms of its professionalism. And its overall sort of whether or not it was able to develop sort of a republican ethos, meaning sort of apolitical as sort of an institution, and I don't think that that's particularly been borne out, and so we're sort of seeing that resurgence now in parts of Francophone Africa. But I think that it's also important to draw a number of distinctions here. I don't think that Gabon is, all that similar to Niger. In fact, I think there are quite a number of differences. The Bongo family held on to power for 55, 56 years in Gabon. You really had sort of an entrenched authoritarian regime of hereditary nature. And in Niger, we were seeing, cautiously optimistic trajectory towards strengthening democratic institutions that was completely disrupted by the military coup there last month. And it's also worth noting that military coup in Sudan that has now sparked the civil war there. Sudan is not a francophone country. One doesn't have to look too much farther back to see the military coup in Zimbabwe that ousted Robert Mugabe, and similar fraudulent elections taking place in Zimbabwe last week as well as to Gabon. And so I think while there is this loose francophone connection, it may be that may be a little bit simplistic, just drawing that connection. I think there's more at work in each of these individual countries than just their French ties.
Fair enough. So, Mohammed, if we look beyond, I guess, the French connection here, there's also Russia now at play, and even the Wagner Group. We've seen civilians waving Russian flags in several countries now. What do African populations want from Russia? And in the case of Niger, why is it better than France?
That is a very interesting question. I would rather say that it's a question of what the people do not want from Russia. Raising Russian flags and being anti-French, I think, suggests that Russia now presents as a better option out of the two. It's not necessarily that Russia is better than France, necessarily. And the people are acting, I think, out of frustration. France has been in the country for several decades, and they do not seem to witness the change that they want. So it makes sense that if we don't like France, well, what is the alternative? Then Russia presents itself, and the people are in support of Russia. Now, as to whether Russia is better than France in real terms, material on all fronts, I think it will be a question of time, because at the time that French colonialism, 1800, started, we can imagine that the Nigerian people, and for that matter, when colonialism started in other African countries, those citizens were not immediately aware that colonialism was happening. They were not immediately averse to the arrival of France or England in their countries. It was only after a time that the experience of colonialism started dawning on the people. So as to whether Russia is better than France, for me, will be a question that we have to answer 20 years, 30 years from now.
Okay.
But, yeah.
Yeah. Oh, you know what? Quickly then, do you think though Russia is less happy, judging from their responses, less happy to see the coup in Gabon than it has in Niger? And it makes you question, what interest does Russia have in Gabon to condemn the coup there, or say would rather see a peaceful resolution there, unlike in Niger?
I think Russia wants to concentrate on the Sahel. More broadly, I think, because it looks like the governments there, you have all the three central Sahel countries, Burkina Faso, Mali, now Niger, actually pivoting towards Russia.
Okay.
So it wouldn't sound good for Russia to all of a sudden be a little bit in support, for lack of a better word, of Gabon. It might be too obvious that Russia wants to pursue disruptive politics in the continent. So they may be less interested, not because they do not support the coup, but because they perhaps want to concentrate on the dynamics where they're actually getting a lot of interest.
Okay. Olayinka, in the case of Gabon, let me ask you this. Why was there kind of this desperation actually to hold onto power. It's been well over 5 decades, as we know, of one family rule. Ali Bongo even had a stroke in 2019 that kind of cut into his capacity to do his job. So, I mean, why not just retire? Who or what interests are really at stake here, particularly when it comes to business? Gabon is a significantly kind of oil-rich country. Gagan Gupta has been cited many times for doing corrupt business dealings with the Bongo family and having a role to play in Gabon. What do you make of why this single family has held on for this long?
Well, I think you just answered the question where you talked about the oil. You know, they've held the helms of affairs in the country for so long that they've entrenched themselves as a family over all the economic affairs of the country. So it's very difficult to let go because number one, they know that if a new regime comes in, some of the things they've established we take from them. So as much as possible, they want to remain in power in order to protect this interest. And even if they leave power, they want to put someone that would have their backs, or somebody that would continue in their footsteps so that they don't lose this interest. And more broadly, when you look at the amount of power African leaders have and the kind of things they can do or get away with, it's amazing. You know, the resources at their control, the opulence, the loyalty they get, and the kind of the patronage systems they've established for themselves and their cronies. They don't want to leave the position, and that's why we see more and more countries or presidents trying to change the constitutions to use more terms. We can look at Cameroon, for instance. The president can barely walk. But it continue to stand for elections and in one way or the other, manipulate the elections and win. So they've entrenched themselves so much that they think if they leave, they might lose some, if not all, of this interest.
Right. Daniel, many had hoped that, broader organizations like the African Union would be able to help stabilize countries in a stronger way, help stabilize democracies in particular. But now we've seen the African Union actually suspend Burkina Faso, Mali, Guinea, Sudan, Niger. We don't know what will happen to Gabon now. How does the African Union now actually decide which military leaders, even dictators, are worthy of membership? And how much value does an organization like the African Union, ECOWAS to a lesser extent, really have?
That's a fair question. I think it's a huge challenge for African leaders. I think, if I may, I think I understand what's happening today on the continent as sort of a resurgence of whether or not military rule will be accepted again. And we're coming out of a period in sort of political history in Africa where, norms had been fairly well established, that civilian rule was the name of the game. We saw a number of leaders have been able to manipulate that situation to their benefit to remain in power, like the Bongos, or like other contexts that have been mentioned on the program today. And that has presented a number of difficult challenges to the professed adherence to democratic governance by the African Union, by ECOWAS, and other regional economic communities. And I think that it's incumbent now on the leadership in those multilateral organizations to decide what steps they're willing to take to ensure that the military does not take power. And I think that's exactly what's playing out in West Africa today with the case of Niger and this debate over whether or not a military intervention will move forward. It's a hard stop to the coup that was perhaps one too many in ECOWAS. Will they finally say no, military rule is unacceptable, and that means that they will do what they need to do in order to ensure that it doesn't happen?
Mohammed, I could see you agreeing with some of what you heard there. Why so?
Yeah, I agree with a lot of it. ECOWAS lost a lot of legitimacy, and I think the AU as well. And the best way to look at it is, let us take a coup register of ECOWAS. How many members of ECOWAS right now are either beneficiaries of coups or themselves have massaged the constitution to give themselves longer stay in power. So with that, I don't see these regional organizations, continental organizations, actually being able to stymie these resurgence of coups in the continent. It is also important to note that this idea of the resurgence of coups ought to be subjected to some scrutiny. Is it really the resurgence of coups, or are those coups actually, did they actually leave? Because if you have democratic consolidation and there is an entrenchment of civilian rule, one would expect that coups will not come with this kind of force and take place in so many countries across the country. So I'd rather think that these events of political instability were actually hiding behind the facade of democracy.
We're going to have to leave it there. My apologies for having to interrupt, but I'd really like to thank all three of my panelists so much for being with us on this edition of The Newsmakers. Fascinating discussion. And our viewers, of course, for joining us as well. Remember, you can follow us on Twitter, and do be sure to subscribe to our YouTube channel, X, that is. I'm Andrea Sankey. We'll see you next time.